One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Case studies are so much fun. It's really interesting because when I sit down to brainstorm, like what should I talk about and different ideas, I think that last year and even previous years, like so much of it was the step-by-step how-to and just things that were very educational. And I realized I was not practicing what I preach. Even though I have so much fun teaching and showing you different things, I was really lacking some of the parts of content marketing that I love so much. And that's talking about my favorite shows and the ones that I know so many of you love too. And case studies are just the way to do it. And it's so much fun. So I have a very special case study for you today. And I think I've already told you this story before, but it's just worth repeating because I'm a huge fan of comedy. I've been a fan of comedy since before I can remember, because my dad would listen to Jeff Foxworthy tapes. Like I literally remember him having the cassette tapes, and he would drive me to school. And I remember listening to Adam Sandler's comedy albums in my bedroom when I was a kid and laughing for hours. And I've read so many comedian memoirs that I've lost count. So it's no surprise that the Smartless podcast is in my top 5 podcasts. Actually, I'll probably say it's top 3. It's top 3. Like it is definitely up there. I do not miss an episode. So today I'm breaking down the Smartless podcast in our next case study. And I can't wait to share with you all the nuggets that I've learned about content format and interview style from this group of guys, because they are hilarious and so much fun. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach you how to start, launch, and market your content with confidence. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of content creation, this is the show that will help be your time-saving shortcut. So let's get right to it, shall we? Okay, so if you're not familiar with the Smartless show, like you don't know the Smartless podcast, then I need to introduce you to these guys because it's Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes. They are the three main hosts of the show, and you probably recognize their names. You may know them from their various TV roles, movies, reality shows, and I always think of Jason Bateman, which of course, y'all, I have 3 kids. So whenever I talk about somebody, like it's a podcast host or somebody, a celebrity, and the kids are like, well, who is that? Of course, I can't reference like a rated R movie or something that they've never seen before. So I always try to relate it back to kids' movies. I actually have one for each of these hosts at least. And so for Jason Bateman, I always think of Horrible Bosses, which is a rated R movie, and it's hilarious. I love that movie. It's so good. And Zootopia. He was the Sly Fox. He is my favorite character in Zootopia. It's one of those like Disney movies that I could watch over and over again. I guess it's Pixar. It's one of those. I know it's on our Disney Plus account, but I love Zootopia. And I could name so many other ones that he has been in. But also we have Will Arnett. So Will Arnett, I always talk about to the boys. It's like, oh, that's Batman. He's Batman from the Lego movie, from the Lego Batman movie. And he was in Monsters vs. Aliens, which is one of those movies that is like solidified in my brain because if you have kids or you've been around little kids, you know that they will latch on to one movie and watch it over and over and over again. And that is one of those that I love so much. So he's in Monsters vs. Aliens, and he's just done a ton of voiceover work. He has that like real deep, gravelly voice, and it makes it so good for podcasting. But then, of course, we have Sean Hayes. Sean Hayes from Will and Grace. He was in The Cat in the Hat, and I loved him, which is funny because he doesn't have a huge role in this movie, but I loved him so much as the assistant in the movie The Bucket List with Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman. Like, they've all done a ton of things because they're huge stars. Like, they have been in Hollywood and acting and doing all kinds of really cool things for a long time. But I want to kind of paraphrase their story of how they stumbled into podcasting, because in real life, these guys have been great friends for decades. Like, not just, oh, hey, we kind of know each other, let's start this thing. Like, they've known each other for a really long time. So they have this deep history between the 3 of them. And early on in the pandemic, they were basically 3 friends sitting around in 2020, and they're like, what can we do together? Because they weren't all filming stuff and they weren't doing anything. So they got a little restless, and they officially launched their first episode of the Smartless podcast in July 2020. Oh, sorry. It's hard to say. July 20th in 2020. There we go. With interview with Dax Shepard, who, if you've listened to the Armchair Expert case study, which I'll link in the show notes, this is one of my other favorite podcasts, and they're all like really good friends. So I think that they had kind of a huge advantage, they had a huge advantage having Dax in their back pocket to help them navigate the world of podcasting, because he had already been doing it for several years. So, I mean, it's always a good friend to have if you're like, hey, I think I'm going to go on this journey or start this thing. Like, they literally had access to someone who has one of the top podcasts in the world, show them the ropes and how all the things work. So as longtime friends, these 3 guys, they have really a deep connection with celebrities that we all know and love, but especially comedians. And this is why I love this just so, so much, because you listen to specific shows, like, especially for me, like I listen to a lot of motivational, business, marketing, like that kind of stuff. And I don't hear Will Ferrell or Adam Sandler on those shows. And so I listen to this podcast for pure entertainment. And I have laughed. I have almost cried. Oh my gosh, go listen to Bradley Cooper's interview. It was so, so good. But they've had so many people that have very distinguished backgrounds. They've had, I already mentioned Will Ferrell, Maya Rudolph, Adam Sandler, Melissa McCarthy, Reese Witherspoon, Tina Fey, Ryan Reynolds, Sandra Bullock, and just so many people that are just truly inspiring, and they're hilarious. And I mean, they just have so many cool people. You can tell I'm a mega fan of the show. I know I'm totally geeking out right now, but I just think it's so cool that they have this deeply rooted network that you don't typically see these people doing a lot of podcast interviews because they're working. Like they're working actors or they're working comedians, they're working writers, directors. They recently had James Cameron come on and talk about Avatar and just all the cool things that they've done. And I think that it's just one of those things that if you are a big fan of behind the scenes in the celebrity world and Hollywood and movies and TV, like I am, if you can't tell, this is the show for you to listen to because it just has all the cool things and it's so casual. I think that's what I love so much about it. It's not scripted, and we'll get into why it's not in a second and how that actually plays a fun dynamic role in everything. But I really want to break down the format and the interview style because we are, an educational podcast here on the Profit Podcast. And I wanted to really give you a little just behind the scenes of what they've actually done and how it's been done. That way you can take some of these nuggets and either apply it to your content or consider it for what you're creating this year and beyond. So let's talk about their format and interview style. So to date, the Smartless podcast has published more than 125 episodes. And it's kind of funny because I was looking at like 4 different resources, and it just depends on where you're looking at how many episodes they've published, because I look at my Good Pods app, which is where I listen to all my podcasts, and it says that they've released over 202 episodes. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was going to go with that number. Then I looked at IMDb and it says that they've published more than 130 episodes. And then I look at another website and it tells me 120 something. So either way, they have published more than 100 episodes. I do know that. And I think that some of the other episodes that Good Pods are counting are the Wondery and Amazon episodes that they are using to promote on their show, which we'll talk about Amazon in a second. But they did a live tour in 2022, which I mean, I gotta say, like, how upsetting is it that they didn't come to Texas? They were mostly in the Northeast, and then they went to the Midwest, and then of course they stopped in LA, which I believe that's where they all live. But I am just like, I'm throwing it out there. I hope they go on tour again because I would very quickly buy tickets. But the host published a new episode once a week, and it's every Monday for non-early access listeners. I'll explain what that means in a second, but just know that every single Monday they publish a brand new episode. And I love that they come out on Mondays for a few reasons. One, it's a great way to start the week. But 2, most of the podcasts that I listen to come out with new episodes on Tuesdays. So Tuesdays is kind of like a content heavy day for me as a listener. And I usually can't get to all of it in one day. And so I love that they come out on Monday because it just gives me something to start the week with, and it's not overlapping with the other content that I'm going to listen to throughout the week as well. So that's fun. But the most interesting thing about this podcast is the interview style, because they have 3 main hosts. Like, it's not like one person just interviews the guest. Like, they're all in every episode. I think that there might have been 1 or 2 in there where like someone was sick or they were out of town. And so like only 2 of the hosts were there, but most of the time it is 4 people talking. It is the 3 main hosts and then their guest. And you would think that it would be hard to follow, like as an audio only experience, 4 people talking, but they make it great. Like it's not hard to follow at all. Like once you get in there and you know everybody's voice, you just get used to it, especially if you're a consistent listener or maybe you're already a fan of the host or whoever's coming on to be interviewed. Like it's really easy to quickly pick up who is who's talking, and it's not as complex as you think it would be. And the thing that I love most about the host is their relationship that they have together. Like you can tell that they are friends because of the digs that they take at each other are so funny. And I mean, it just sounds like you're sitting around listening to a group of people that have been friends since they were kids. And they're just like, they throw those into the interview. And the guests that they speak to, usually they've known them for a long time. Like it's really fun when they get somebody on the show that all three of them are good friends with. And it just sounds like you're sitting at like a dinner party or, you're sitting in a bar with all these people and they're just talking and you're just listening in on the conversation. And it is so fun. But the format of how they actually get the conversation going is they'll start the show. So let's just break down like each segment of the show. At the very beginning, they start and they just talk about like, welcome to the show. It's usually one of the hosts that does a small intro. Then they play their main music and their main theme. And then the episode just starts. There's no like introduction of the guest in a way that, it's like, oh, this person's done this and this. Like, it's like they hit record as soon as they all get on Zoom and they just start talking, they catch up. And I mean, this can go on for a while sometimes, which also makes it very interesting because I imagine as the guest, like the guests are behind the scenes and they don't say anything. Because what happens is one of the hosts will reach out and invite someone onto the show and they don't tell the other people who it is. And so they're on this Zoom call, they're just talking, like shooting the breeze, and they're talking amongst themselves. And then they're like, oh yeah, by the way, I guess we need to talk to the person that we're interviewing. And they'll start giving the other host clues, whether it's reading from their Wikipedia, which is usually wrong and hilarious, or they'll say, we know them by X, Y, and Z, or they'll read some of their accolades, or sometimes they just make stuff up and they throw everybody off. And it just makes everything so much more funny. But I love this aspect because it just feels so real. It just feels so casual. It's so lighthearted. But it's like they have a secret guest behind the scenes. And then finally, if they guess the guest, or if they don't, the guest reveals themselves. Like I think that they have like something covering their camera on their computer and then they like unveil themselves. It's like a whole dramatic thing. It's really funny. But it makes for great entertainment because it's not scripted. Like it's not scripted. At the end of the day, I think that that's what I love about podcast conversations is it's not scripted and no one feels the pressure to be on video because it's audio only. Like I think that they've recorded video of, certain interviews, but most of the time it's audio only. It's audio first experience. And so when they're there and it's not scripted, the hosts don't have a chance to do research. Like all three people don't go out and do research on the guest and create questions before the interview starts. Like they just kind of show up. Like if it's not your guest, you just show up to the conversation and you're like, all right, I wonder who we're going to talk to today. And it's really cool. I really like this, I guess, more unscripted, casual version than some of the more highly scripted shows that you have heard and seen. And it's just really fun. So let's talk about the production. So of course, I don't know all the ins and outs of how everything is produced, but I do know that they record at home, except for their tour. And with the exception of when they interviewed President Joe Biden, they did do that like in a location where they could all sit and be together. And I'm sure there was all kinds of security checkpoints and all kinds of things that they had to do. But typically they record at home. I don't know if it's over Zoom. I've heard them talk about Zoom many times, but I think that that's literally what they use. They record at home, not in a studio, and they have a production team that edits everything together. And you can hear them giving credit to those people at the end of each episode. So if you're curious, who does what and how many people, or just listen to the very end. They always have that as the tag that is part of the outro at the end of each episode. But let's talk about content specifics, because I know we talked about the interview styles, but I want to talk about content and the aspect of everything that is related to their podcast, because
being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
So many of you listening really stress out about websites. You are so freaked out or stressed out about it, whether it's creating one, maintaining one, anything to do with a website, you freak out. And I want to give you I hope you breathe well after this. They have one of the biggest podcasts on the planet, and they have a super, super simple website. It has a menu that consists of a homepage, episodes, so all their podcast episodes, merch. They do have merch. Their tour dates, which is funny because it shouldn't be there anymore. That was in 2022. You click on it and there's broken links everywhere. And they have an about page that is literally their podcast information. And that's it. It's so, so simple. So if you have a podcast and you're I want to do this, I want to have fancy, I want to keep it simple. Keep it simple. It does not have to be so complex when it comes to having a website for your show. I actually have the Potty Report, my daily show. I just point it directly to my Buzzsprout website. I used to have it on crystalprofit.com and I would maintain it there, but now it has its own thing. I bought a domain for it. It's thepottyreport.com, and you click, you enter that URL and it points you directly to my Buzzsprout website. So just throwing that out there, you can absolutely keep it simple. They have proven that. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about their interviews, how long they are, because this is always a question, how long should they be? They don't do the 3-hour interviews. That doesn't typically happen. All of their interviews usually run about an hour. You're going to commit to at least 60 minutes of listening to them. And it could be slightly longer, but it's typically not, like I said, 2 and 3 hours long every episode. They typically keep it between 60 and 90 minutes. And I want to talk quickly about their ads. They do host-read ads for all their sponsors, and they're so funny. I don't even mind listening to their ads most of the time because they make me laugh so hard. Oh my gosh, they make me laugh so hard. And I think that if you're looking for ad inspiration, please go listen to this show and listen to all the ridiculous things that they say because it's so, so fun. And they do something interesting too, where they put music behind all of their ads. So it actually makes it easier to skip them. If you're someone that doesn't want to listen to ads during an episode, it makes it easier because you can just keep skipping until you no longer hear the music. So just a little behind the scenes for my listening habits. Sometimes I'll listen to them, sometimes I don't, but there's my little trick behind the scenes. But I've mentioned Amazon a few times and I talked about early access earlier. So let's talk about the Smartless podcast getting acquired by Amazon. So this was a really interesting thing whenever I want to say like whenever my paper came across my desk and I saw this, I don't read newspapers like that, but that's kind of how this it feels like it happened is this information came across my computer and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool because we had not seen in the podcasting space an acquisition of a podcast like this one. So in June 2021, their show was acquired by Amazon for around $80 million. But what's really interesting is that this acquisition didn't mean that their show would become exclusive to Amazon. So unlike others, like we've talked about on the Armchair Expert podcast, they were acquired by Spotify and they went exclusive to Spotify, meaning you cannot listen to the Armchair Expert podcast on any other apps. You have to go to Spotify. But with Smartless, they didn't go exclusive. What they did is you can still listen to the podcast where I listen to it on my Good Pods app. You could listen to it on Apple. You could listen to it on any other app. But what it means is that if you have an Amazon account for Amazon Music and Amazon Podcast, then you can get early access rights, Amazon bought the early access rights. So if you're an Amazon user that has, the upgraded paid plan for music and podcast, you can get the episodes early. So that's the different, I guess, kind of model of how it works. So Amazon bought the early access rights and they can air it. I want to say it's up to a week before I listen to it. So I don't have this upgraded version. I just listen to it when the episodes come out on Mondays. But I think that you can listen to it if you have the other account up to a week early. So that's the model that they are trying to attract people that want that exclusivity in by way of getting that early access. So super cool. I still can't believe how much money these big corporations are investing in podcasting, but it just makes me so happy because it means that podcasting is going to be around. You know how much I love podcasting. It's exciting to see these really big media companies investing in talent and not making them exclusive. I think that that's what's so interesting about it. And that's how they're able to still have ads. So Armchair Expert, they no longer have ads on their show. You'll hear breaks, you'll hear song breaks, where they have their music in between where previously they would have had ads. They don't have those anymore because Spotify, I guess, just pays for everything and gave them, a huge deal. But when they're no longer exclusive, I think they will go back to ads in those specific spots on the Armchair Expert podcast. Sorry, I'm talking about both podcasts at the same time, but I was thinking about what's cool for Smartless is not only did they get this amazing deal with Amazon, but they are continuing to have sponsorships and supporters. So who knows if they're making more money than the other podcasts because they're not exclusive and they can still have ads. So very interesting. The last thing I want to talk about, and I almost forgot this when I was planning this episode. I had to go back and write it in. The buy. So they will be done with an interview. They'll let their guest go and say, okay, thank you so much, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll kind of riff a little bit and be like, oh my gosh, that was such an incredible interview. And maybe one big takeaway that each one of them had. And then they try to throw in the word buy in a very weird way. It's almost like you have to listen to it, but they're trying to throw one another off on getting the word buy into a sentence without actually saying it. Because they were like, how do you end these podcasts? How does this actually work? And then it became a thing. It's like a segment of their show. So let me give you an example. They would start talking about something that's when should we publish these episodes? Should it be bi-weekly? And then they like throw in the word bi and it becomes this, it's so long. It's like B-Y-E-E-E-E-E-E, like bye. It's so funny. Maybe you have to listen to the show to really understand. Don't worry, I'll link to it in the show notes. But this was so much fun. Like, this wraps up the case study for today. I have the biggest smile on my face. I could probably talk about this for 7 more hours. If you had more questions, let me know. It's been on my list to cover Smartless as a case study, and I'm so glad that we made it happen because I love talking about this show. Obviously, I love talking about this show, and it would be a missed opportunity if I didn't give a shout out to a true super fan of the show, Angie Trueblood, who is a fan of and a friend of the Profit Podcast. And she's been on the show several times. And we have this Voxer thread that goes back and forth where we've talked about Smartless many times. And I know that she is the biggest Smartless fan that I've ever met. So Angie, I had to give you a shout out in this episode because I know that that would make you laugh too. But that's all I have for you today. So make sure you subscribe and follow the Profit Podcast wherever you are listening. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.